Look Outreach is underwritten by the generous support of Munter Enterprises. Family owned and operated since 1972, integrity is important, as our family name is on every project. Our word is our bond. Munter Enterprises. Just build it.
Welcome back, everyone. Well, I'm telling you right now, don't go anywhere. You're going to really want to hear this interview, and you're probably going to want to act on it afterward. I don't say that very often, but you know the topic of the opioid addiction and the epidemic, pandemic in our country right now is so serious that we just continue to want to bring in experts, talk about it, make you more aware of it, make you more aware of what you can do, and if you're afflicted yourself, give you some options on what you should be doing. Joining me today is the Executive Director of the New York Association of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Providers. This is John Coppola. Welcome, John.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. Followers of this program know that we do a lot of interviews on this. We cover a lot of stories related to this topic. You're in a very, very unique position. For 21 years, Executive Director of this association, and I guess the first question I would have to ask you is, you must be stunned at the change, especially in the last 10 years.
Well, the thing that I think that I'm stunned by is the fact that this opioid epidemic, there's actually a pandemic that we're dealing with. It shows no signs of reversing. It shows no signs of slowing down. It's an escalating crisis. It's a public health emergency, and we're not doing enough to really impact it to the degree that we should be.
Right, and I hope that you heard that. I want to go back on something. Epidemic, kind of definable. You know what the boundaries are and whatever. A pandemic, no end in sight. And when you realize that as a society we're facing something with no end in sight, with escalating deaths indicated here in a chart for just the last 5 years alone, then you realize that we have got to wake up about this. Let's talk for a second about the government and the state government and what they're doing and what they need to do. You hear big numbers, right, John? $200 million being put into this, $126 million being put into it. Well, you would think with those kinds of numbers that they would be able to grab this and contain it. Why? What's wrong in there? Where's the disconnect?
Well, I think unfortunately sometimes the numbers don't actually capture what's really going on.
Yeah.
So in the case of the budget in New York State for treatment, prevention, recovery services, we're really barely keeping pace with inflation. And I know that's really contrary to what people are hearing, right? Because one of the realities is that all of the programs that currently exist in this state are and have existed for years, are now being impacted by huge demand for prevention services or treatment services to address this opioid epidemic. And when you do a calculation, say how much of our resources are going to help solve this problem, those existing programs get factored in. And so while it might be true that we're spending those resources on prevention and treatment, if we ask ourselves the question, when this pandemic started, did we commit any new resources so that people could hire additional staff, provide additional treatment, provide additional prevention in communities across the state? The answer is no. We really didn't invest the kind of resources that are necessary. And if we look back, the chart that you just referenced that showed the spiking number every year, a new record number of overdose deaths, well, there's a line that goes through that chart which shows relatively flat funding, barely keeping pace with inflation. And we have to match the magnitude of this crisis with a magnitude of resources capable of impacting it and stopping it.
Boy, well said, John. When you go back to kind of the origins, let's go back maybe 5 years, maybe as much as 10 years, but really five years, right? I've heard many times, well, this really started because doctors were overprescribing painkillers to their patients. You know, you hear the other side of that equation, which is that, a doctor is supposed to provide relief for their patients. So a kind of a disconnect there. So they start prescribing these medications. And do you is that kind of accurate? Is that really where this sort of started?
Well, I think the prescription opioids, which were sort of billed as being sort of the preferred way to address pain, right? There was really a time where doctors were really pressured to make sure that patients were sort of pain-free, right? And there was this sense that, and even some of the marketing suggested that opioids were a safe way to do that. And we've since learned that that's not the case. And one of the things that really struck me as somebody who's worked in the field for a long time is to really understand when we looked at something like oxycodone or we look at hydrocodone or morphine, OxyContin, all these different medications. When you look at them and say, let's look right down at the molecular level, how are these pills different than heroin? And I heard a physician recently say that it's 1 or 2 molecules difference. And he said that what we should really be telling the public is that these pain medications are essentially indistinguishable from what would be a heroin pill. And the idea there would be not to scare people, but just to say, it is, these prescription medications are essentially like heroin pills. And so if you need them for pain, if they're prescribed by a physician, you need to be extraordinarily careful about how you take them, how many you take, etc., and really need to be educated about them, right? So that you use them with all of the respect you could possibly have so that it reduces the potential danger.
Yeah, I've got it. We are going to break this interview into 2 parts because the next phase we want to go into is really to talk more about how you can educate yourself and also prevention, what we can do to help ourselves, help each other, and also what we can do with contacting our officials to get them to recognize the fact that we see this as a pandemic also. So John, we're going to break this interview into 2 parts.
Great.
And we'll start part 2 after I do this, okay?
Fantastic.
If you want to see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.